Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel today, where we're going to be doing a slightly different video to normal. This isn't going to be anything highly dramatic in nature. What I want to do is to do more of an educational piece in today's video, because I do think it's important that we understand the transition with jobs, and we're going to focus on vehicles today. We're going to look at these UAW strikes, which stands for the United Automobile Workers. This is predominantly USA. We're going to look at this, what's causing it. I feel as though the media haven't really quite grasped what's actually happening here with these strikes, what the impact is in the future with the demands and everything else. So I'm just going to take a different approach today to look at this. We're going to look at the history of vehicles and how this all started. We're going to move into the present, look at how things are now, and then we're going to look towards the future, and we'll bring in aspects of political movements as well towards EVs. What's the impact of that? We'll look at China, we'll look at other countries, and then hopefully by the end you will have grasped exactly what's happening at the moment with everything around this, these strikes and the vehicle market. Now, if you are a car enthusiast, you'll probably know the whole history of the vehicle market. You'll go right back to Ford. You've probably read all of his books and autobiography and everything else. And you'll probably remember, and I did a piece on this quite a while back when I was talking about the stock market, that there used to be thousands of car companies in America at one point. There was absolutely loads of them. And just like most industries, what happens is you tend to converge until you have a large 3 to 5 typically. And we're seeing this with a lot of other industries as well. So in the US, who do you have? You have Ford, you have GM and Chrysler, although they're rebranded now to Stellantis, I believe. And you'll also probably remember how there was this huge industry in Detroit in the US back as far as the 1920s. That is what used to attract people to Detroit. And we talked about this as well in a video, how when you have the movement of the money and the jobs, especially if they're high-paying jobs, away from an area, what happens is that area tends to collapse because the local government will build itself up based on the revenue coming in particular the property taxes, the income tax revenue, and then eventually you end up with crime in an area and it becomes rampant. And that's why I've given that forecast that I believe that parts of California, San Francisco in particular, will also go that way eventually. And we're already seeing that just from the last 3 years since forecasting these things. We're already seeing crazy things happening in a number of US cities. Now, you think about Detroit back in the 1920s. Well, what happened in the 30s? If you remember the whole Kaizen movement, constant and never improvement out of Japan. And they took the Ford assembly line and they took workers and that knowledge, that skill level, and they put it into improving the vehicles in such a way that it made the whole process much more efficient, and therefore they could bring down costs. So you could say that the pendulum sort of swung over there, but then what happened in 1961? That's when General Motors started to create these robots that could start doing spot welding and a few other things. So they started to bring back a lot of that vehicle manufacturing, and there was a lot of investment into it, but it started to bring down costs. You had CAD as well, your computer aided design aspects. You then had a lot more robotics and production lines coming in. All of these things reduced the cost of manufacturing. Of course, you look at Tesla today and you look at their factory where they don't have this sort of scale of unionized workers like Ford and GM and Chrysler have. They can be a lot more efficient and profitable. And also they use a lot more robotics. So we know Elon Musk, he relies heavily on robotics and AI. He believes that's the future. And actually, I was invited to SpaceX once when I was out in, I think it's Hawthorne in California. I forget the exact location. And I still remember when I went in there and I saw they had a Terminator and the Skynet and everything else. And it sort of gave me a glimpse, it gives you, I guess we can say, a glimpse into the mind of the person of whether that's sort of some sort of dark humor or what he thinks is going to happen in the future. But we've heard all these warnings about AI and about robotics. I'll probably talk about that another day this week or next week, because there have been some major advancements there as well, which really surprised me, and I think it will surprise you when you see these advancements. Now let's jump back to the UAW then, and I'll just give you 2 points of historical context here then. So the UAW was created through efforts by the Committee for Industrial Organization, the CIO, the National Labor Reflections Act, the Wagner Act of 1935, and sit-down strikes were key in pressuring automotive companies to recognize unions. That's point number one. Point number two, the modern negotiations began in 1996. A new era of negotiations began with the big three, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, with the focus on job security, lump sum bonuses, tuition assistance, limits on outsourcing, and again, this is a key one here, emphasizing cooperation and shared prosperity. Well, I think now that you understand that, and you understand that these things sort of broke down last year, you can see why the union is asking for a lot more money, especially when you look at the fact that the CEOs of these companies made over $30 million. I mean, this is serious money when the workers are being told there just isn't enough profit to fairly distribute. So we know how this works now, and I kind of see both sides of the story. I'm watching some commentators who are 100% with the union. I'm seeing others who are 100% with the company. Whereas I tend to sit in the middle here, and I'm not doing that to not be confrontational, but I'm doing that because I can see both sides. I can see that from a company perspective, if you give, in fact, let's look at some of the statistics here. The pay rise being requested is 40% over 4 years. That is, I mean, that's a staggering amount to request. Also looking at the 32-hour work week is what is being proposed. I mean, to me, I can't even fathom a 32-hour work week. And again, I'm flipping here because from a company perspective, that is going to make them non-competitive in the world. But then again, we have to flip, because as we're moving towards EVs and more automation of the process, AI, robotics, you are going to see that improvement in efficiency. So I can kind of see both sides there. But for someone to only want to work 4 days a week, but get paid based on 5 or more days per week, I think that's a great thing, and it would be amazing if we could all do our own sort of work, whatever that looked like to us, and only work a couple of days a week. I mean, it would be a utopian society if we could do that. But unfortunately, and let's look at this again, we know that we live in this new form of digital slavery system. And again, I'm not using my words lightly there, because that is what we live in. I mean, those of you who've done my recent course, Money Psychology, you'll know it was a very controversial chapter on that. But I talked all about this new system where all that's happened is we've moved towards this high level of taxation. We're working a lot harder than we used to. We're not able to buy anywhere near what people used to buy. If you go back to the 60s or 70s, you could have a husband out working, the wife didn't even need to work, raising the kids at home. You could have a really nice house, you could have a car, you could have lots of leisure time and all this sort of stuff. So you ask, well, what's changed then? What's happened there? It's not that people are, being lazy, which I'm seeing a lot in the media. All these people are trying, they're lazy and stuff. It's that there's so much extraction now from us as workers. They are extracting our life energy via taxation, so that we have to work harder and work more. And of course, we're under a lot of stress as well now. You see the stress everywhere in society. Now, moving back to some of the statistics then, the US auto industry isn't what it used to be. Previously, it used to be the jewel in the crown on a global scale. And there wasn't really, apart from Japan and maybe one or two others, there weren't really that many competitors to the US auto industry. But now you have competition all around the world, predominantly China as well. And let me just give you some stats here again then. So the total value of the US car and auto manufacturing market was 104 billion so far in 2023. 9.2 million US vehicles were produced in 2021. 923,000 American workers work in motor vehicles and parts manufacturing, and 1.25 million are employed by automobile dealers. Actually, that is a staggering number. I did not know that many people were employed by dealerships. But I think that's another key point we have to look at as well. It's the ripple effects of what could happen here. Because it's not just the manufacturing itself. You've got to think of all of those suppliers who supply the industry. So they are going to be affected as well. And this big shift towards EVs is a very interesting one. And what I find just the irony of it as usual, or the hypocrisy of it, is you remember when Biden did his speech and he said, I am the president, the first president in history to accelerate electric vehicles. I'm injecting $135 billion into moving us away from combustion engines and towards EVs and all this other stuff. And then there was a 50 billion grant or whatever it was. And then at the same time, so he's killing all of the jobs in the auto industry, in these, in the combustion engine sector, whereas the EVs don't require as many people. And then he comes out and says, I stand with the union, I stand with the UAW, this is terrible, these big greedy corporations, and the profit gouging, we're going to get to the bottom of this. And the people don't realize that the same person that's causing the problem with the acceleration towards EV is the man that's coming to apparently save them. And all this stuff about mandating the auto manufacturers around EVs and the employment and that the people are going to get more money and everything else, that isn't how capitalism works. And sure, you can move towards a more socialist system with companies, and this is happening in lots of other countries, and sometimes it will work for a short period of time, but eventually it always collapses, because there has to be that incentive there for entrepreneurs to go out and really feel passionate and inspired to create something. And I think this year alone we've already seen, or in recent times, we've already seen over 115,000 jobs just in the US alone lost to this transition to electric vehicles. And people are not buying these electric vehicles in the way that the governments of the world expected people to buy them. Actually, just one correction, as I was talking, I remembered the CEOs of those three car manufacturers earned over $20 million each, not 30 million as I just said. So just a quick correction there. So let's have a look then at what the car manufacturing CEOs who we just mentioned are saying. So GM boss Mary Barra said the demands of the union amount to over $100 billion in costs. The Ford chief, Jim Farley, said they would drive his firm to bankruptcy. And especially with this competition from the likes of Toyota and Tesla, which do not have unionized workforces, so they can enjoy lower labor costs. So some of the main things that are being brought up by the PR departments of these major car manufacturers are that this will result in higher prices for consumers, and they're talking significantly higher, because you think if you've got 40% wage increases, well, they have to be passed on to the consumer. They've also said it will create panic buying by consumers. It will create a problem with the production of all these different vehicles. And overall, they're just saying that this could collapse the companies. Now, you look at what's happening in China, where they're very heavily manufacturing electric vehicles. They exported 2.5 million cars in 2022. As of 2023, they are the largest exporter in the world, surpassing Japan, Europe, America, Japan, and South Korean companies. 1/5 of all EVs sold in Europe are made in China, and China accounts for 32% of all global auto sales. So this is more than the US, India, Japan, Germany, and others combined. But it's not just, we're talking about US here, we talked about China, but it's not just there. Even in Europe, they're talking about this could bankrupt the European car industry with a lot of measures that are coming across with the EVs. And they're talking about how China is as much as 10 years ahead. Whether that's just spin, who knows, but they're saying that they're 10 years ahead with their electric vehicles and their costs and production facilities. VW saying that 12% of Germany's workforce could be impacted, up to 200,000 jobs affected in Europe by 2030. And then it gets even more dystopian where they're talking about, you know, people aren't going to have any jobs in the future. They're just going to be sat around with nothing to do, and there's going to be robots everywhere. Well, I think we'll probably save that for another day. But overall, I just wanted to give you a better overview of this situation and what's actually happening with all of these strikes, with the auto industry in general. But the reason you're seeing so much disruption, you've got to just understand, is that it's not natural. What is happening is due to government policies forcing people into the use of electric vehicles, where a lot of people simply don't want an EV. They prefer their gas-powered vehicle. And whenever you try to force change at such a rapid rate, you tend to get a lot of disruption like we're seeing at the moment. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. God bless you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow.